All right, everybody, welcome to another Friday night of Keto Rocks Radio. I'm Jim Hobbs, and I think beside me somewhere is my carnivore co-host, Brian Damaged Forsythe of the band Kix and Rhino Bucket.
Yes.
Modeling his Blackberry Smoke t-shirt. And we also have Mr. Brian Shanker. We're going to have the threesome with you guys tonight. He's going to stay on for the full time. So welcome back to the show, Mr. Shanker.
Thank you.
And then we're having back the Meatologist, which we're going to pepper him with a lot of meat questions and hopefully get some insight on what meat glue is and is it good or bad, and also hear about Dennis's favorite recipe. So welcome back to the show, Dennis Carrico.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Great to have another meatologist down here. We literally, the last show went forever and could have gone the whole day. Brian and I talked afterwards. I mean, we could have just listened to you talking about meats and enlightening us on the different cuts. So it's glad to have you back to the show. And before we get into the meat glue, what it is and what it ain't, Brian, let me ask Brian Forsythe. Brian, have you ever heard of meat glue?
No.
All right. Well, there you got.
My mind is like trying to figure it out. Like, what could that be? But no, I haven't.
All right. Well, we're gonna get into that a little bit later. So stay with us. But I know Brian Shanker's got a bunch of questions to ask Dennis before we actually get started, and then we're actually going to bring up some of Dennis's favorite recipes and how he loves to cook his meat. So, Mr. Shanker, what questions you want to start off with for Dennis with?
Okay, Dennis, sorry to ambush you here, but after the last podcast with you, it got me thinking about some things that I've always wondered. So I've got 4 questions off the top of my head that I came up with this morning. So the first one, you and I had talked yesterday about my New York strip roast that I did, and you had mentioned that the New York strip is one of the more tender cuts, and I personally prefer a ribeye. And so am I confusing flavor from the fat in a ribeye with tenderness? Because my ribeyes always seem to be much more tender than my New York strips.
Like the last podcast when I was with you guys, when we were going through the breakdown of the animal, the New York strip is right next to the rib of beef. In fact, if you take one of those roasts that you were looking at, they're usually about 18 inches long. What they did is they sell them in halves, and that's what you picked up. So you got a selection there. It looked like maybe you would have had one of the New York strips pieces closest to the rib. So
okay.
If you look at one of those ends to the New York strip, you might just see a glimpse of that ring that's on the ribeye itself. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's separated between the fat and the eye of the ribeye. You'll just barely see that, and they have to hit that right on. So of course, ribeyes are more expensive. So if you can get that New York strip closest to the rib of beef, it'll be a comparable steak, depending on the chef. But I would that would be my second choice, besides the tenderloin, which is the bottom part of the T-bone. And the top part of the T-bone, obviously, is the New York strip. And so, yeah, ribeyes, I tell people all the time, that's the best piece of meat on the steer. It's a muscle that the steer doesn't use very much at all. So that complements the tenderness of the beef. And the fat is flavorful. I don't eat the fat necessarily, but it does leave the flavor.
Well, you're talking with 3 guys that really like the fat in the ribeye. So
I can tell.
Fat is where it's at.
Yeah. I always tell customers, fat is taste. That's when you go buy hamburger, you can't buy a real lean piece of burger unless you're going to eat it, raw. And some people do. But yeah, it's if you were to break open a already cooked hamburger, you're not going to see fat. You know, all that fat has dissipated by the heat into the pan, but it leaves flavor, and it's not going to be as dry.
Right.
Use your own discretion. Sometimes the 80-20 ground beef will leave enough fat in there to leave you a decent hamburger. But you got to make the hamburgers bigger, because obviously they're going to shrink.
They shrink up, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, next question.
Mm-hmm.
So when I freeze something, which, I'm always buying something that's on sale and I can't eat it all, so I'm going to freeze it. So freezing it for later use, and then I thaw it out. I notice there's a lot more liquid once it's thawed than when I first purchase it. Does the freezing and thawing process draw out more of the liquid from the meat, and would that cause it to be less juicy after cooking and resting it?
Yes and no. I suggest to customers back in the past that once you freeze something, it pretty much stops the aging of the beef, but it still will pick up some of the icings of something that you would freeze. So that moisture that you packed in there is the only thing that will start to show itself when you start to thaw something out. In fact, the blood will run into that as well. And sometimes you might smell it and say, well, that doesn't really smell very good, even though it's been frozen 3 to 6 months or something. But you're really just smelling the degrading of the blood. The meat's still fine, but that's the first thing you're going to notice when you open up a package, is that gassy buildup, that pungent smell of old blood. But it really would depend on the part of the meat too as well. So if you're doing a New York strip steak or a ribeye steak versus a chuck roast, then a chuck roast, it really doesn't matter, because you're going to be all day with that. So it really depends on, I wouldn't leave a piece of meat in the freezer for more than a year, because you will pick up that freezer burn taste to it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that go for tongue too, Dennis?
Pardon me?
Does that go for tongue too?
That I've been thinking about since our last talk, and I've never tried it, so I'm willing.
I think Brian at this point be willing to ship it to you.
Yeah, just put a bottle of Worcestershire sauce in there too with it.
So Dennis, you kind of touched on actually what my third question was going to be, but not specifically when you freeze something. But I've had instances where I've opened up a package of meat, of steaks or whatever, that have sat in my refrigerator for a couple of days, not necessarily been frozen. And then I get a little bit of that funky smell, and you kind of went into that. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the meat went bad, especially if you're before the sell or freeze by date, correct?
Yeah, and the USD does regulate that everything has a date, right? So of course you can't put an extended date on something, because it'll just be rancid after a while. Mm-hmm. But you can use your own discretion. I tell people, if it does turn somewhat discolored, that doesn't mean it's bad. That discoloration is really only about as thin as your fingernail. So if you were to take your knife and cut the steak in half, you can see the fresh meat in the middle and the most brownish discolored part on the outside, which actually is complementing the meat, because it's an aged piece of beef, and the blood with its chemical compounds will help tenderize it as well. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it, because what you're smelling is maybe the poultry pad, the moisture pad that's underneath it that catches all that blood. So that's what's most rancid smelling, and not so much.
So if I open it up and maybe dry it off or rinse it off a little bit, and I don't smell that anymore, I'm good to go at least.
Yeah.
And then, so you kind of also touched on my fourth question, which was about the discoloration, where You know, sometimes you see meat, it's bright red, and sometimes you'll see little patches that are a little bit brown, and sometimes you'll see the whole thing kind of not be as bright red. That's not too much of a concern there either, correct?
No, in fact, that's actually a good question, because many times I've had customers ask me to cut them a fresh steak because we didn't have an inch and a half out in the case. So I don't know if you ever heard of the term oxidation, where if you were to cut a piece of fresh meat, just like your blood, it doesn't turn bright red until it has a chance to oxidize. So I would come out and give them a fresh cut piece of meat, but it had a crimson brownish color to it, you know, mostly crimson. It wasn't bright red because it hadn't been under any light or any oxygen. And they'd swear up and down I gave them a piece of old meat. And I said, do some shopping. By the time you go through the register, that thing's going to be very, very bright red, just like everything else that's in the meat case. So in the morning time, years ago, we used to come in and there's big round roast. You know, if it discolored or the sticker that was laying on top of the meat would actually turn it a greenish color, we would take our knives and just shave everything off, and then we'd have a fresh roast again. And it'd go back in the case for another day or two until we decided that we would make cube steaks out of it or something else to fill a hole in the case. But yeah, it's all about that oxidation, and believe me, if a piece of meat is bad, you'll know it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
see, I'll eat anything. I don't even. I never pay attention to expiration dates.
Yeah, you know, it, like I said, that, you know, by law, you have to have a date on stuff, you know, just like a can of tuna fish. You're like, man, that's 3 years from now. How in the world does that happen? But it's all through the testing. You know, they put a piece of meat on a counter and everybody just watches it, see what it does. And it's all has to do also with the elements too. So, you know, how efficient is your refrigerator? You know, it just, you know, use your best discretion. Usually you're not wrong.
Dennis, when they're pre-packaging, sending meats pre-packaged, do they actually add coloring? I've heard they add coloring to the meat packaging just so it looks red in the packaging, even though it's more of a dye.
What happens is, and not necessarily to steaks or roasts, but they do gas a package of hamburger. And that package of hamburger has a gas in it that not only makes it last longer, but man, I've opened up packages like that and that gas will hit you right in the face. And I'm like, wow, that's gotta be unhealthy. So yeah, we're constantly doing things to in the food industry, not only just with meats, but to extend the case, you know, to extend the life of a piece of meat, constantly in the works. And we'll get into that later with this meat glue thing.
Well, let's since you brought that subject matter up, let's go ahead and just dive into what meat glue is. It's something I never heard of until someone, I forget, was it you, Shanker, or someone asked me about it, and I was just like, or maybe it was you, Dennis.
It wasn't me, but I actually saw like a show, like a little expose on that years and years ago, long time ago, and actually forgot about it.
It's been around a long, long time. I don't know if you guys remember the pink slime era. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That all went away, but it didn't go away. You know what I mean? People stopped talking. You know, there was something diverting our thoughts somewhere else. But yeah, nasty stuff. Jim had mentioned to me, hey, don't forget, we're going to talk about this meat glue today. And I said, thanks. I just threw up in my mouth. But yeah, it's nasty stuff. I'll read from some notes that I wrote down.
Sure.
because there's some details that I want to
Now it's
provide.
my understanding, because I remember watching a documentary a long time ago, like when they make those nuggets, that's what they're using to bind all that meat together.
Yeah.
They're using that meat glue to bind to make the nuggets.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and especially processed meats. Hence the word processed, right? So let's talk about that. Meat glue. There's an acronym of that description of meat glue. It's MTG. It's called microbial transglutamase. And first of all, let me touch this right out of the gate. Europe has actually banned this for a long time. And our FDA and USDA are fully in support of restaurants and food processing plants. Whoever has these scraps of meat that are unsellable in any other form, so they add this meat glue to it, and it's actually a binder. It just binds the proteins together, which is pretty tricky stuff. So let me just start out by saying, to most consumers, the reconstituted steak is indistinguishable from a real slab of meat that can fool most meat eaters. And that's why restaurants use it. I don't know what legal terms they can describe a piece of meat that they've used this in a restaurant, because would you call it a New York strip because they formed it to look like a New York strip, or a tenderloin steak? So it's, to me, it's pretty unlawful misrepresentation.
Well, what it does, the MTG, or the meat glue, you said it binds the proteins together.
Yes.
To me, it's like clotting. So I can't imagine if you're literally basically gluing the meats together through the proteins, how that in your system would do the same thing and be causing clots in your own bloodstream.
Well, great question, and I'm going to touch on that right now. It binds proteins, which creates antigenic peptides. And what this does, it tricks your body into thinking the proteins are an allergen, which sends the body into an autoimmune response. Make sense?
Yep.
So it's like, whoa, what the hell is this? So when your body goes into that autoimmune thing, it leads to all kinds of healthy things, predominantly a leaky gut syndrome. People that do eat a lot of processed meats, sausages, what have you. If you got something that's ailing you and you just can't figure it out, if you're allergic, or after you eat a big meal on something and you find out, why do I feel the way I do? That'd be the first thing to stop, is any kind of processed meats.
That's basically.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's basically why I went carnivore, is to try to cut all the stuff out that was making me feel bad.
Yeah, I've lost 55 pounds, guys.
Yay.
It's been quite a journey. It took me 7 months, but it's all, it's all in what you eat,
Well, I have a question about the meat glue. Is it mostly restaurants that use it, or do they sell meat like that in the stores as well?
Yeah, a lot of processed meats have it in there.
Okay, so what?
Go ahead.
What constitutes a processed meat? Is that like pepperoni, sausage, scramble, or scrabble? I mean,
right. Like, let's say if you buy a ham loaf, or you see the ham loaf that's in the case of a delicatessen.
Yeah.
And you wonder, how does that hold together? I mean, what part of the, pork is that, pig is that? And it's just scraps of stuff that they have, mixed in a. I can just picture maybe one of those huge mixers that you'd make cake out of or something, and it just binds it glues the meat together, and then they form it, and obviously all processed meats are cooked, right?
So it's like a meat cake.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So, you can slice it. You run your knife. You can run a dull knife through, and it still doesn't, mess up the piece of block of cake meat that you have. And it's just pretty nasty stuff. Just to touch on a couple other things.
Well,
Brian, you got a question?
yeah, another thing I wanted to ask was what is it how is it presented on the label, like if you're trying to check for that?
Not the FDA and the USD has not required all products to have it labeled.
Oh, that's
Now, here's the thing: if they are required, then it's just done by the acronym MTG. So if
okay.
you're reading ingredients to something and you run across this product may have MTG, well, what the hell does that mean to you? It meant nothing to me. So you just kind of go over the next ingredient, unless you're really inquisitive and go, okay, well, I got to look this up.
See, I do that. I'm at the store. I'm Googling every ingredient on the label that I don't know what it is.
A lot of times, if you find yourself having to do that, you might as well put it back on the shelf and move on.
Right. Yeah.
So this information that's being provided is provided for some reason, So,
That's why like one ingredient foods are the best, like meat, like beef. It's only beef.
Can't go wrong with that, right?
Right.
And that's why they say, stay away from the steroids, and that's processed to me,
So gyro meat, Dennis, has that probably got that meat glue in it? Because I mean, the way those restaurants have it, I mean, it's way bigger than a lamb. It's so it has to be pieces that are glued or put together.
What are you talking about? That's visual to the consumer, that hey, this is where your meat's coming from, kind of.
I'm talking about like if you went to, like, I know Peggy and I were down in Nashville at the food court, and this one restaurant had these big round pieces of meat. One was chicken and gyro meat. Yeah. And they shave it, right? That knife, they shave it.
Absolutely. There you go. I mean, that's an alarm saying, geez, how did they get it to do that?
Yeah.
What part of the animal does that, and so, yeah, it is processed. But, everything these days are considered a step saver. People who don't have time to cook.
Yeah, it's a convenience.
Yeah, step saver convenience. And it saddens me when I see parents come in with their children and they're looking for that quick fix Lunchable to send to school. It's really bad. Like some of these Lunchables are like, make your own pizza. So I asked this one, I said, wow, he can make his own pizza? Yeah. And they let him use microwaves at school too, Otherwise he's eating a cold piece of pizza, which is not bad for some people who used to party a long time ago.
I love morning pizza. Or at least I did.
Yeah. A meat lover's pizza, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I'm at amazed at this. I'm feeling sick because I had that meat in Nashville and it was actually pretty good. But now, I'm like inside I'm cringing from what I devoured.
It probably had a lot of sodium in it. I touched on that last week. If you look at any processed meat, like hot dogs, it's just loaded with sodium, and it really overcomes the natural taste of whatever they're putting into it. So it just, salt. Everybody loves salt. They're like, wow, that doesn't taste too bad. I could eat that. It's just a mad world out there. like Brian touched, it's a convenience which has brought us to the shapes and forms that we're in today. Obesity, neurological disorders, you name it. And God help your liver too, right? Your liver is processing all that stuff, and it just wreaks havoc. It's just very unhealthy. Of course, Europe seems to things kind of flow from east to west, right? No matter what you're talking about.
Right.
But they smartened up and just said, and that's why some people in the East maybe even live a little. They're leaner, they're healthier.
Yeah, that's the first thing I noticed when I went over to Europe was
Yeah,
even before I knew that was the case, it was just the food was better, and
yeah.
that's why because they've outlawed all that the crap that the U.S. is allowed to put in their food.
And a great practice is you may have to go to the grocery store 3 or 4 times a week. I know that's a drag, but don't pile all this food in your refrigerator because it's going to last 10 days, and it really shouldn't. I mean, that salt is preserving it for one. This meat glue stuff, like we were talking about, is just it really is like say if you were to go to a restaurant, excuse me, and had a steak that was comprised of this meat glue. Well, the meat glue, it's 100 times more likely that you would come down with a foodborne illness. Believe it or not, I mean, that's huge. And even more so if you were the type of person who would like a steak that was on the rare side, right?
Yeah.
So they always tell you, like, well, you need to cook this meat fully done, or you're susceptible to some foodborne illnesses, E. coli, etc. And believe it, guys, food handling is key. Taking it from the sink to your counter, washing your hands, everything that you can do for yourself is going to help keep that nasty stuff away from you. So, when they're using these meat glues, they don't care. They don't care. And it's all about the corporate greed of things. Something that would be discarded in a trash can. Somebody walked by and said, "What are you doing? We could throw that in this and make add it with meat glue, and then bam, we got ourselves a hot dog." So hot dogs, cheeses, believe it or not, yogurts, a lot of dairy products. So yeah, just Google it. Get intimate with it, and just know what you're putting in your body.
Well, it must be fairly cheap for them to use it, because it makes sense now why like some of the large fast food chains can sell 10-piece chicken McNuggets for $1 or $1.50, because they're just using leftover scraps and then putting it together with this meat glue, and they're serving it as an entree.
Yeah, what part of the cow does a McRib come from?
Exactly. And when you talk about scraps of meat that are left over to go into hamburger, and that's what we would do when we're working on the meat block and we're cutting away scraps of meat to get to the main course of the meat. Those scraps we would make into hamburger, and we would just have to be conscious about how much fat we would leave on there, depending upon what fat content that we could call that ground beef. Now, they took that away from us years ago, and they started making the plants process this thing, because now they're gassing the meat. They're putting a really thick layer of plastic over the container, and it just holds up like a long time. I've seen packages like that last 3-4 weeks. That's ridiculous.
Hmm.
You know, they actually allow us to take it out of the box in the back and take it to the scale, put 3 or 4 days as a pull date, and then if it doesn't sell, we would have to discard it, because once we took it out to the meat case, and that's where the elements start, you know, changing the integrity of this hamburger. So if we kept it in the back under cool conditions, my goodness, that thing would last 3 or 4 weeks. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
Well, let's move on to some good meat recipes that are your favorites, because and I'm going to bring up some pictures that you sent me, Dennis.
Okay.
So let's start with, we'll do this one first.
Okay. The 2 pictures I sent, this is the first in preparing, which happens to be my favorite steak meal. I've been making it for, gosh, since 1986. How many years is that? But
That's a long time.
yeah, it is. But I never used to like blue cheese until I was introduced to this recipe. And because, you know, stinky blue cheese, right?
I love blues cheese.
Well, then you'll love this, Jimmy. I was telling Jim this would be my go-to meal if I was on death row. So so what you're looking at here is 2 pieces of flank steak. And you can't go into a store and say, you know, these flank steaks are rather thin. Can I get 1.5 inches thick cut? Well, that's not going to happen. It is what it is. And they're primarily located closer to the leg of the animal under the underside, and they're covered with pieces of fat, so they're not really visible until you start peeling away that fat. And that's why you see those really heavy spots there.
Right.
And that's been touched by a knife, by myself or whoever, and to get down to the nitty gritty there. But back in the day, we have a meat tenderizer that we would make cube steaks out of. And so I don't have a home machine like that. What I do is I take my knife and I score the meat. As you can see, I've gone both ways, scoring that piece of meat to add some ridges in there, because what I'm going to describe next is why I did that. And what I do is I take just a few ingredients. This is so simple, but the main ingredient would be crumbled blue cheese, garlic, fresh garlic to your taste. Like somebody might ask me, well, how much garlic should I use? I don't know. Whatever whatever you prefer, right? So it is to taste. And half a stick of butter, whole stick of butter, depending upon how big of a meal you're going to make. So what you do is you put that on in a nice glass bowl, and you can nuke it for about 20 seconds. It warms it up just enough to where you can start stirring it, mixing it together. It makes a really nice thick paste. And so, as you can tell, that bottom steak is just overlapping that top one, maybe by a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch.
Right.
And the reason being is that I'm going to roll this, and it's very difficult to roll just one of those. You're just going to run out of room. So I stick it out on a cutting board. You can actually, after you score it, you can pull that piece of meat in different directions and actually form it, so all those edges will symmetrically fit together, if that makes sense. So what you do is you make a nice thick paste, and you, first of all, my first application would be to press it into those crevices. And then the next application would be to add a thickness to it, because what's going to happen next is, after it starts to cool down and just before it starts to get solid again, I'll roll that and I tie it with butcher twine about 1 inch apart. So if you were to show the next picture, this would be
I'm
what
going
I'm
to bring
talking
it up
about.
now. Yep. Let me
Yeah.
bring it up now.
By the way, this is the meal that I made my birthday dinner just on January 22nd. It's either,
Yeah, I've seen this recipe demonstrated before. Now
oh,
that
you
you're
have?
talking about it. Yeah, yeah.
It's
So,
great.
so you get the paste, you put in the paste, you roll it up, you tie it up. So that's all you have on there is your garlic, your blue cheese crumbles, and the butter, and you're just laying that on. No salt. You don't preparing it with salt at all.
And again, I don't tell people to salt things just because I don't want to, just be the person that like a doctor tells them, don't put salt on it. But, you can salt anything depending upon how much salt you can take without having swelled legs the next morning. So, usually I'll salt it, sure. But I
Okay.
won't salt everybody else's meat. I'll tell them, hey, I didn't salt it. You add to your taste. That's
Hey,
I do. Yeah, salt, pepper. That's a normal ingredient to complement steaks.
hey, Jim, are we supposed to be seeing a picture here? Because we're not.
Oh,
I'm not.
yeah, I have it up. I'm sorry. It should be showing it. Why is it not?
I don't see it either.
Jim, maybe you should cancel the screen share and maybe try it again.
Try that again. Do.
Ah, there it is.
There it is.
Okay.
Only thing missing in that is the fish hook, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the lunker there. And I always make more than what I need to, just because the next morning you're like, man, I can't wait for lunch.
So
So
you tie this. So you tie this thing up, and so let's take it from there, Dennis, because I'm
Okay,
getting
so-
hungry.
I know.
the reason why it's rolled that way, it's for presentation, because when I shared this with Brian Shanker, I missed a step and I was in a hurry to get to my birthday dinner, so I took it the way it was. But what'll happen is when you cut down in between those twines, you'll see, and you open up that meat, you'll see a really nice display of a pinwheel of the blue cheese. And it's beautiful when it's displayed in a meat case, because that's when it's most effective, where people just go, wow, what in the world is that? Now, look, if you guys don't like blue cheese, or if somebody listening or watching doesn't like blue cheese, pick your favorite cheese, something that you think will melt like a blue cheese. Like, there's all kinds of different cheeses out there.
Goat cheese.
Goat cheese, excellent. Yeah, excellent. Use whatever cheese,
So Dennis, you guys used to prepare these and be selling them just like this behind the counter at the deli?
No, we would have what was called a gourmet meat counter. So it wasn't packaged in a regular package of meat tray, etc. This would be more or less in a pan, where you would display those steaks side by side, and it would show the nice pinwheel in it. Now, each pinwheel steak had one butcher twine around it, just to maintain the form of it.
Right.
So what I used to do years ago was, each steak that I would cook, I would cut a piece of aluminum foil, so I wouldn't lose the drippings that would start to happen when you started to cook the steak. However, aluminum foil, there we go, another toxin, right? So I stopped doing that years ago. So there's nothing wrong with just using a glass Pyrex dish. It doesn't have to be foil. And the reason why I did that is because I would usually serve like a rice with that, and that juice and cheeses would kind of float over into the rice, and it would make a great complement to the rice as well. So maybe on next podcast in the future, if you have me on, I'll probably make this once again, and I'll show you how pretty the pinwheel looks.
So
I think we all need to come over your house the day that you're going to do that again.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you slice it first and then you cook it. So you wouldn't cook like the
Yes.
whole thing at once.
No, only because that has some really huge density to it right now, right? So the edges would turn practically well done, where the most center part would still be rare.
Okay.
So by doing it individually like that would be your best bet. And
Have
again,
you ever tried sous vide it to see how it would turn out?
no.
Or do like a reverse sear on it, like just bring it up to temperature and then well, I guess you couldn't sear it because it's got the cheese in it.
It's got the cheese, yeah. It's more delicate than that.
Yeah.
So, flank steak people use for like fajitas, and it's very rare that people would buy flank steak and without marinating and eating it like a New York strip, because it has that toughness to it.
Yeah.
So this is a way that we overcame that toughness, and by complementing it with the pinwheel cheese, paste, garlic, butter, it's really a kick butt piece of meat, man. I tell you, like I said, if it's my last meal besides sushi, that's what I'd go with.
You're a sushi person too. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to try this. Hey, Brian, have you ever tried this before? This type of flank steak recipe?
No, I was never a fan of flank steak because I occasionally if I find myself in a Mexican restaurant, I'll try to just order meat, and that's what I end up with, and it's like shoe leather.
Tough. Yeah, it's always tough. That's my experience too. It's always is very tough.
Yeah, that's why sometimes I would go to when I was cutting meat back in the day, my hair was very long. So when I would walk into these meat shops, I welcomed myself walking through a meat door because I just worked one county over, right? And I was meat manager. So people would look at me like, what are you doing walking in here? And I said, hey, I just need this piece of flank steak that I have that I found out in the case. Could you run it through the tenderizer just once? And they're like, okay, what are you gonna do with that? I said, I'm making stuffed flank steaks just like you have next door in the gourmet meat case. So they're like, oh, are you a meat cutter? I said, no, I'm a meatologist.
well, speaking about meat, Mr. Shanker, do we have meat deals of the week for us?
Yes, we do. We do actually.
Oh, well, let's hear it. I'm anxious to hear. By the way, I did stock up my freezer with the hamburger, the ground beef from Giant.
Awesome. Hey, do you want to stop the screen share? Because I can only see you and a hunk of meat. There we go.
What else do you need?
Yeah.
It's a lot of things, but never a hunk of meat.
Good to see everybody's face too. But so interestingly, speaking of that flank steak, you'll have to go all the way to Carnes up in central PA, but they've got some flank steaks on sale for $10.99 per pound through the 28th. Dennis, is that a good price per pound for choice grade flank steaks?
It is. I've seen it creep up, over the past few years. Gosh, I think I remember seeing it for $12.99 somewhere lately.
Okay, so that's not bad.
No, and again, if you go to Costco or Sam's Club, you got to buy in bulk. So
yeah,
that's when they cut you a slight deal on it. But if you can find single steaks, for that price, I would go for it, because usually, like I said, they're covered with fat. So if you're getting a nice piece of cleaned up meat, then that's good, because it's like 95% edible.
Okay, cool. All right. So also Food Lion, they've got a deal running through the 1st of March. Choice grade bone-in, obviously T-bone steaks for $9.99 per pound. Aldi, they've got something interesting. Haven't seen much of these on sale. Through the 1st of March, they've got some choice grade Black Angus short ribs for $6.49 per pound. And Harris Teeter, we're back on the New York strips. So they've got their rancher grade small pack for New York strip small pack boneless for $8.49 per pound. And if you get the value pack or the steakhouse roast, it's $7.99 per pound. or choice grade boneless New York strip steak or roast steakhouse roast for $9.99 per pound. And they've also got some, the brand is DK. I don't know what brand that is, but DK Natural Meats Organic Grass-Fed Ground Beef, 16-ounce packages for $6.99 per pound. And I've been seeing when ground beef's not on sale, you're getting $4 or $5. So for those of you that like the grass-fed stuff, $6.99 I imagine is not too bad. Brian Kroger, they've got some chuck roasts for $4.99 per pound. And then the last deal, Giant Eagle, they've got some certified Angus beef boneless Market District beef stew cubes for $5.99 per pound.
Great. Well, talk about New York strips. You had a pretty big New York strip that you were cooking yourself. How'd that turn out there, Mr. Shanker?
It was pretty good. So I did the sous vide for 8 hours at 132 degrees. I had seasoned it the night before, put it in the food saver bag with Morton's seasoned salt and Blues Hog. What is it called? Bold and Beefy. And then a bunch of pats of butter all around it. Let that sit overnight like that. Sous vide it for 8 hours at 132 degrees. Then I cranked the smoker up to as high as it would go. Got tired of waiting because it should go higher than 500 degrees. But when it was between 475 and 500, I started searing it for 2 minutes on each side. And it came out medium rare, which was just a little bit under what I prefer. So I ate a chunk off the end. But for reheating it, that's perfect because you're still going to have some pink left and still get it, warmed up. So it came out really good. I was happy.
Well, that's good. Bold and Beefy. That sounds like a soap opera.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, good. So I'm going to head to Food Line. Food Line had the
T-bones.
That's what I'm going to go get, the T-bones. I will go get those.
And then short ribs at Aldi.
Yeah, I might have to check that out. I love short ribs.
Yeah.
Is that a good price, Brian?
You asking me?
Yes. You're the short ribby.
I don't know. Usually I
He doesn't
order
look at the price.
Yeah, I know. He doesn't check the price. He just looks at how much of meat's in a package. That looks good. I'll grab it.
Well, usually when I get short ribs, they're from like Tennessee grass-fed, which is, I order online. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know about short ribs. But I don't
see it on sale often enough to know if that's a good price. But let me look back in my history to see, and maybe Dennis could comment.
I've always thought short ribs were overpriced from the very, very beginning. And the reason why I say that is it's off the shoulder of meat and there's a bone in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always just, meat cutters and I would share or comments about it. And we would always refer to it, well, why don't you just buy a chuck roast? Because sometimes years ago, we sold bone-in chuck roast. So you had the bone there for flavor. And short ribs is one of those pieces of meat where you set it and forget it. You'll see restaurants say this has been simmering for 18 hours or 6 days or whatever, right? So it's kind of a showcase kind of thing, if you were to make it for a company coming over and you made it in a crock pot, I bet you wouldn't be able to get that whole piece of short rib out of the pot without the bone falling off,
Yeah.
So it's really it is a showcase piece of meat, but
it's actually one of my favorites. I love
Yeah.
the low and slow on the smoker.
the bone, it makes its own broth. You know what I mean? So it's good stuff. It's just that Brian, people don't. We talked about it earlier. They don't have the patience anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what? I'd rather just go somewhere and eat it. But it's fun. I enjoy, the trial and error part of it, and the do's and don'ts about it. And, just like, I make my own jerky, and if we got 30 seconds, I'm going to endorse something with you guys that I've been using for a really long time. It's a wild, gamey meat store out in Montana. It's called High Mountain Jerky, and I just happen to have a box with me today. And this is what it looks like. Now, all that's inside of it is a package of Cure, which is the salt, and these natural seasonings. And you mix the two together, and I always use top round because we talked about it earlier. That's a very lean piece of meat. And if it's raw, it's at its most tender, right? The more you start cooking a piece of round meat, the tougher it's going to get. So this jerky, since it's lean, no fat hardly, I cut it to strips on a big block cutting board, and I mix the Cure and the seasoning together, and I pretty much salt each side of the meat. You stick it in a nice gallon bag and stick it in your refrigerator for 24 hours, and that gets the Cure start working into the meat. And I used to now some people use dehydrators, but I don't have the patience for a dehydrator, so I use my oven, the grates of my oven. And I've messed up my oven a couple times, because all the drippings and stuff, but I've since then have made it better without having all that mess. But it's a good way to curb someone's appetite if you got a gallon of bag stuff like jerky sitting around. If people are having a hard time transitioning into the carnivore and they say, man, I just need some carbs, I'm just dying here, just grab a meat or two with a nice fresh glass of ice water, and you'll be good to go for quite a while. So it helped me get through that process of missing a square meal 3 times a day. Because they say health-wise, it's great to have those fasting times during your day.
Mm-hmm.
Some fasting, intermittent fasting. You don't have to go 3 days without eating and just drink water, but you can definitely do intermittent fasting. And that could last from the time that you go to bed at 10 at night all the way to 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So intermittent fasting is good for you.
Yeah, I know Brian does that. I know you do at least a 16-hour window minimum, and
Yeah, that's my minimum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
and I do the same thing, and some days usually it's just in a 4-hour window.
Yeah, my average really is like 18 to 22. But if,
Wow.
some days, like I'll allow myself 16. That's
Well, you maintain your energy, don't you?
yeah.
You
Oh,
slug.
my clarity my mind gets, the longer I go, the clearer my mind gets too.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's been going on for a long time. I mean, it takes care of a lot of your health concerns.
Well, even for those people who are not eating strict keto or carnivore, it can put your body into ketosis just by the 16 hours that you're giving your chance for your body to actually process all
Yes,
that
sir.
food. It still puts you in ketosis. So for those of you who slip up every now and then, but if you're doing at least a 16-hour window in between, or you're only eating in an 8-hour window and 16 hours of not having anything, you can keep yourself in ketosis. So it's got a lot of health benefits. And Brian just said the one, I get clearer the longer I go. Like I'm sharper, I have more energy, I'm clear. And so it's a huge part of my daily regimen.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of people walking around these days with insulin resistance. And that's huge when your pancreas is trying to supply you with the production of sugar when you're eating so much sugar. So you get really wacky feeling, if you, and sugar, like you had touched on a few weeks ago, it's poison stuff, right? A lot of things got sugar in it.
Well, between sugar and processed foods, those two things wreak havoc, especially when you're being told to eat 5 to 7 meals a day. and those
Yeah.
insulin spikes are just going up and down like a yo-yo. Yeah. It's it's difficult for you to be able to actually get healthy, or at least not be so inflamed. But while we're speaking about intermittent fasting, things that can improve your health and make your body stronger, Brian Forsythe, what bit of advice would you give someone to be able to improve their health and make their body stronger?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say you mentioned chuck roast. I have one on the smoker as we speak. But I would say eat your meat.
And I'm going to go do that as soon as we're done recording this show. I have two quarterhouse steaks sous vide that I'm looking forward to just throwing them on the grill top, a minute on each side, and then devouring them. But with that said, before we end this episode, Brian, when's the next Kix concert coming up? I know you guys played Baltimore this past weekend. How did that go, first of all?
Oh, sold out.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. Yeah, Baltimore.
Your hometown.
It's always going to be good.
Yeah. So where are you guys heading out next?
We got, let's see, next week is off, and then the week after we do 2 gigs on that weekend. It's Las Vegas, and then the next morning we fly into Hollywood and we do the whiskey.
Hollywood. Well, that'll be a great show.
A regular globetrotter there.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to Rob Galpin the other day, and I was trying to tell him what, he was on this podcast, and he mentioned your name, Brian. I said, man, was he with the shoes? Because I remember years ago, before my brother passed away, probably in late 70s, 80s, early 80s. I remember seeing you guys play. Where was it? West Virginia, maybe?
Probably.
Yeah, I was only probably 16, 17 years old, but
Martinsburg, maybe?
yeah, that's where I started to put who you really were, because I was like, because he was saying, well, are you sure you're doing this with him? Because he's playing with Kix right now. I said, I'm pretty sure. I think it's the same guy. So
Yeah.
I've been out of touch for a little while, as you can tell.
I was 20 years old when the band started back in
That's
70s.
pretty
So.
yeah. That's
Well,
great.
anyway, does anybody else have any questions for Dennis?
I think we got to have a part 3.
Yeah.
Dennis, I think I agree with Mr. Shanker. I think you got to do your flank steak, your favorite recipe, and we will meet at your house and we'll film it from your house.
Okay. And you know what? I thought of a great segment. I told you I make my own dog food. And my dogs, I know you cook yours, Jimmy.
Yep.
But we started a raw diet because, that's what canines ate many, many years ago. Even,
right.
Thousands of years ago. So the way they digest food is much differently than us. They got different enzymes that break it down. And it's all about food handling. Like I told my veterinarian, she said to me, gosh, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Your dogs look great. Their coats look good. Their skin looks good. What are you doing? I said, well, I make my own raw dog food. And she's like, whoa, you sure about that? Because I said, yeah. And she said, well, you got to worry about this. I said, let me say this. I'm certified by the Maryland state of Maryland in food safety. So
no, it's funny you bring that up today. I know Brian's going to show us because he makes his own cat food for Smokey. Is that what you got, Brian?
Yep. I've got it's all raw. That's like the ground. This is like chicken and duck. And then I have organ meat that I mix in with it.
I do the heart and liver too.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that because I bought my own.
That's like heart, liver, and kidneys.
Good. Organ meat is very important for them. But I bought my own little grinder, and it's called Carnivore. It's really a nice unit. I'll share that with you next time.
Well, it's funny you brought that up today because literally today's the day we are making Slinky's food for the week. So yep, it's ground beef, ground turkey, sardines,
Oh yeah,
and tuna fish, and
Omega
18
3s,
eggs.
omega
Yeah,
3s
Smokey
for their
gets,
joints.
What were you
yeah,
saying, Brian?
Smokey gets sardines as a treat.
Yeah, it's good omega 3 fatty acids. We watch this girl on YouTube who's a veterinarian who's holistic, and she's into the raw diets as well. But I'll share that with you next time.
All right. Well, we're definitely going to have you back, and we're appreciative that you came on and shared your flank steak last meal. If you had to check out, that's what you're going to go out with is your flank steak. You definitely got me curious. I'm definitely going to have to go try it.
Me too.
Okay. You can email me. I can walk you through it.
Yeah, I'm going to think. I was before we head out here. I'm thinking of putting that. Brian just showed a picture. You got that new smoked salt from Real Salt. Have you had a chance to try that on anything yet, Brian?
Nah, because I still have I have another brand of smoked salt, but Redmond Real Salt's my favorite. So when they introduced that, just I guess this past month is pretty new. So I ordered some.
I was thinking about putting that on the outside of that. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Dennis. Go ahead.
I was brand new to that myself. I hadn't heard about it till you had posted it, I guess, that sack of salt you bought.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna dabble into that and see what that's all about.
All right. Well, with that being said, we thank you for tuning in with us tonight. We want to give a shout out to our meat maidens who are always jumping on and watching and sharing. So shout out to you all. And then we'll see everybody next Friday, same time, same place. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and stay out of the hospital. We'll see everybody.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.